Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. The past several days have been very eventful. We've had everything from civil unrest in LA to cyber attacks affecting the food supply, and all that's in addition to ongoing developments in Europe and other parts of the world. So today, we're going to go over those events, talk about how they may affect normal folks like us, and what we can do to prepare for those effects. First up, we have the ongoing civil unrest in different parts of the country. It erupted on June 6th in Los Angeles following a series of federal immigration raids. ICE agents conducted sweeps at multiple work sites, including a downtown fashion warehouse, arresting dozens of undocumented workers. After these happened, community outrage quickly spilled out into the streets and protests escalated pretty quickly. By the end of the weekend, at least 45 people had been arrested, including a prominent union leader, and 200 were arrested on Tuesday. Protesters shut down portions of the 101 freeway and clashed with law enforcement in downtown Los Angeles, along with the suburb of Paramount. Flashbang grenades and pepper balls were deployed, and demonstrators responded with rocks, Molotov cocktails, and arson. Fun times. One particularly volatile incident involved a group of protesters attacking a row of Waymo self-driving cars near the Civic Center. Several vehicles were spray painted, had their windows smashed, and some were even set on fire. Smoke billowed into the sky as police helicopters circled overhead, and riot officers attempted to regain control using tear gas and non-lethal rounds, and Waymo has since suspended operations in the area, understandably so. The physical damage from all this has been widespread. Numerous buildings have been covered by graffiti, including City Hall and the federal courthouse. Burned debris and broken glass littered streets, and businesses were shuttered, some out of caution and others due to damage. But despite all the chaos, a lot of the city outside of the protest zones has continued to function. Law enforcement presence has ramped up significantly, with downtown streets lined with cruisers and armored vehicles. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell condemned the violence, and the mayor implemented a curfew of the downtown area. On the federal level, President Trump characterized the unrest as a rebellion and deployed 2,000 National Guard troops to the city, later doubling that number to 4,000. And in an unprecedented move, the Pentagon also sent 700 active duty Marines from Camp Pendleton. California officials, including Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass, harshly criticized the deployment, calling it inflammatory and authoritarian. Newsom has since filed a lawsuit challenging the legality of the federal action, and it's absolutely no secret at all that the federal and California state leaders don't get along very well, and all this has just put that on full display. However, despite rhetoric on both sides, the first National Guard troops began patrolling downtown LA and high-tension areas like Paramount by Sunday night. While they initially resisted federal assistance, local police did struggle to maintain control, and LAPD officials later admitted that they were overwhelmed. National Guard soldiers were stationed outside key buildings, including the federal courthouse and the Metropolitan Detention Center, and while they're armed, they've only been ordered to act in support roles unless necessary, and officials emphasized that no live ammunition was being used and that all crowd control measures remain non-lethal. The LAPD declared an unlawful assembly on Sunday night and used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse crowds. Heavy haze settled over the city, and some residents described it as looking like a scene from a Silent Hill movie. Medical personnel treated injuries ranging from chemical exposure to blunt trauma, and fires broke out throughout the weekend, and the fire department was dispatched to multiple blazes. Then public services, including transportation, have also been affected. Protesters, like I mentioned earlier, shut down the 101 freeway, causing massive gridlock. Metro transit lines were rerouted, rideshare services suspended operations in affected areas, and major on-ramps were closed. Businesses around Grand Park and the Civic Center either boarded up or remained closed. And while essential services like trash collection and utilities have continued, courts scaled back operations due to security concerns. However, the unrest has reverberated far beyond LA. Additional protests have erupted in cities like Austin, Dallas, Chicago, New York, and DC. Online images and videos of burning cars and riot police flooded social media and news sites. One BBC News video covering the National Guard deployment garnered over 1.6 million views within 24 hours, and more protests have been scheduled throughout this week. And for preppers, this situation reinforces the need to prepare for rapid urban instability. What began as localized law enforcement action quickly turned into a multi-day crisis involving military deployment and disruption of basic infrastructure, and it's reaching far beyond where it originated. First and foremost, we should all pay close attention to how fast all of this happened. ICE raids were announced in the morning, and by that evening, parts of LA were functionally paralyzed. It's a reminder that even if your area seems calm, events can escalate with very little notice. It also demonstrates the potential for civil unrest to trigger a government response. The use of National Guard and Marines in a domestic policing role is very rare, and it's also controversial. And whether or not you agree with the action, we still need to take a close look at how everything plays out. Preppers have to consider scenarios where movement might be restricted, checkpoints are established, or supply chains are interrupted by different events. Doing prepper basics like keeping your gas tank at least half full, knowing alternative routes in and out of your neighborhood, and maintaining a go bag with the essentials in your vehicle are all essential things. Then stockpiling food, water, and medications at your home will prevent you from having to go out into affected areas or having to make do with limited supplies when stores are shut down. Then situational awareness is key. Avoid known protest areas and don't rely solely on mainstream news. Monitor local alerts, police scanner apps, and social media feeds to stay updated. If you're caught near a flashpoint, remain calm, move deliberately, and have a plan for getting to safety. Situation in Los Angeles is still developing, but it's already a powerful example of how fast things can change and how being prepared can make all the difference. And whether you live in a city, suburb, or rural area, this should serve as a clear signal. Civil unrest can happen anywhere, and when it does, those who are ready are going to fare a lot better than those who aren't. Next up, we have economic volatility, and it may not explode, catch fire, or clog up a freeway, but it can still wreck your life if you're not ready for it. Now, I know that when most people hear the word economy, their eyes just glaze over, but what we're seeing right now on the global stage is more than just some stock market ups and downs. We're seeing multiple red flags go up at the same time, and if you're paying attention, it looks a whole lot like we're headed for some pretty rough waters. Earlier this week, the World Bank released a report slashing its global growth forecast for 2025. Their new number is just 2.3%. That might not sound too bad on its own, but to put it into perspective, it's one of the weakest projections in years, and nearly 70% of the countries they looked at had their outlook downgraded compared to just 6 months ago. So what's causing all this? In short, trade wars, inflation, and a whole lot of political slap fighting. The United States has imposed a series of new tariffs on everything from Chinese goods to imports from Mexico and Canada. Some of these tariffs are pushing the effective rate from around 3% to well into the teens, and that's the highest levels we've seen since the Great Depression era. And just like clockwork, China responded with retaliatory measures of their own, and if this tit-for-tat continues, the World Bank says that we could be looking at a potential global trade collapse. And let that kind of sink in for a second. A collapse of global trade. That's not just an issue for folks in the finance world. That's an issue for you and me and anyone else who buys food, medicine, electronics, fuel, or basically anything that isn't grown or made right in your own backyard. Because when global trade slows down, or worse, seizes up entirely, you will start seeing shortages. Prices go up, shelves go empty, and a whole lot of people who are barely making ends meet suddenly won't be able to anymore, and that's when things start to spiral into chaos. And it's not just trade. Inflation's still running hotter than most central banks are comfortable with. Globally, we're looking at about 2.9% inflation heading into 2025, which may seem moderate, but it's significantly higher than what we saw pre-pandemic. And in real life, it's the everyday stuff that costs more. Groceries, energy bills, rent, car insurance, and everything that has to be shipped across the ocean. The stock market's also reflecting this uncertainty. Prices are bouncing around all over the place depending on the latest political headline or tariff announcement. One high-profile example of that is Tesla stock dropping more than 10% in a single day after Musk and Trump got into it, wiping billions of dollars off the books in just a few hours. All this points to a financial system under pressure, and when you put pressure on a brittle system, it breaks. That's where we as preppers need to be paying close attention, because if the economy struggles, it doesn't take long for real-world consequences to show up at our doorsteps. Think about what happens during a recession. Jobs vanish. Banks freeze credit, people panic, crime rises, and governments already deep in debt start making desperate moves like freezing bank accounts, restricting withdrawals, or flooding the market with more paper money. And then there's civil unrest. History shows us that when people can't afford food or fuel, or when they lose their jobs or see their savings totally evaporate, they tend to take to the streets. We've seen it in other countries, and we've seen glimpses of it here. When the economy craters, the veneer of civilization gets very thin very fast, and that's on top of the social tension we already have. So how do you prepare for something like that? First, reduce your debt. The fewer monthly payments that you're responsible for, the easier that it's going to be to weather an income loss or recession. Second, build an emergency fund. Ideally, you want 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up. I know that that's a tall order, especially with prices where they are right now, but even a little bit of savings can make a big difference. Third, diversify your assets. Don't rely on just one bank or one investment type. If you have savings or retirement accounts, consider maybe moving a portion into tangible assets like precious metals, land, or even durable goods that hold value. Inflation can destroy the purchasing power of your dollars, but silver and gold tend to hold up much better over time. And when it comes to land, it's almost always going to have value, especially if things get worse. Fourth, stock up on essentials before prices get worse. That includes food, water, fuel, hygiene supplies, anything that your household uses regularly. This is one of the easiest ways to beat inflation, because if you buy canned goods, rice, or pasta at today's prices and store them properly, it's kind of like locking in a discount for the future. And if something does go sideways in the economy, you'll be one less person panicking at the grocery store. And finally, stay informed and ready to act. If tensions between major economies escalate, like if China starts dumping US debt, or if energy sanctions lead to oil price spikes, you may need to fast track some of your preps. That might mean topping off fuel, or withdrawing some extra cash, or securing a few items that are about to rapidly increase in price. So stay plugged into what's happening, but don't let the headlines control you. Use them as indicators, not panic triggers. There is a storm building in the financial world. Whether it fizzles or turns into a full-blown collapse is anybody's guess, but either way, those of us who see the signs and prepare now are going to be in a much better place than those who wait until the shelves are empty and the banks are closed. Next up, we have cyber attacks. On June 5th, United Natural Foods Inc., also known as UNFI, announced that it had been hit by a serious cyber attack. They're one of the biggest grocery wholesalers in the country and supply major chains like Whole Foods. When they discovered the breach, they shut down parts of their IT systems to contain the damage. And that decision, even though it was probably necessary, caused immediate disruptions to their ability to fulfill and ship orders. Within a day or two, shoppers were already noticing delays and empty shelves in some stores. UNFI's stock price dropped around 7%, and while they haven't released full details about the breach, cybersecurity experts say it looked a lot like a ransomware attack, where hackers lock up a company's data and demand payment to release it. And this isn't an isolated case. Other food-related companies in both the US and the UK have been hit with similar attacks over the past few months. While UNFI has started restoring its systems, the incident highlights just how fragile our modern supply chains really are. A single cyber attack took down a key food distributor and affected inventory at stores across the country without any sort of natural disaster or physical damage to go along with it. This incident exposes weaknesses that folks like us have been talking about for years. Our food system operates on a just-in-time model, which is great for efficiency but terrible for resilience. Most grocery stores only keep a few days worth of inventory on hand, if even that, so when deliveries stop, even briefly, it doesn't take long for shelves to start looking empty. If a cyber attack like this were bigger, hitting multiple distributors at once, we could be looking at widespread shortages and panic buying. And this kind of disruption isn't limited to food. The same tactics can be used to target the power grid, fuel pipelines, banks, or even hospitals. In a worst-case scenario, these attacks could all happen at once, or be part of something much larger. That's why it's so important to have plenty of basic supplies at home. It'll help ensure that you and your loved ones have what you need, even if supply chains break down or stores close. Also, take a look at how you're securing your online accounts. Like, don't use easy to guess passwords and enable two-factor authentication whenever possible. Also, sign up for alerts that'll let you know if there's been a login to your different accounts, and keep an eye out for stories about data breaches. If your bank or any other service that you use is mentioned in one of those, change your password for that as quickly as possible. The next topic we'll talk about today should surprise absolutely no one, and that's the war in Ukraine. Things over there have really ramped up over the past week, and not just on the front line, but deep inside Russian territory as well. For us, this marks a critical shift, which could turn this into a global flashpoint, which could ripple into energy, cyberspace, and even nuclear realms. First, there have been Ukrainian strikes on Russian soil. On June 5th, Ukraine undertook a tactical missile strike in Bryansk Oblast, just across the northern border. Video footage and military sources confirmed that at least one Russian Iskander ballistic missile launcher was destroyed, and two more were seriously damaged, just as those systems were being ready to fire at Kyiv. Ukraine called this a preemptive move to degrade Moscow's ability to target its civilian centers. But before that, on June 1st, Ukrainian forces orchestrated a covert drone strike called Operation Spider's Web, deploying 117 drones deep into Russian territory and targeting 5 air bases across multiple time zones. The result of that was up to 20 Russian warplanes being hit, including strategic bombers. Some say 10 were destroyed, others report 41 aircraft damage. It's kind of been up in the air, but among those hit were possibly like Tu-95 Bear, Tu-22 M3 Backfire, and A-50 AWACS spy planes. And all those aircraft are essential to Russia's nuclear deterrent. So this wasn't a symbolic drone raid. It was a strike at the heart of Russia's strategic nuclear bomber force. And anytime a nation's strategic assets are hit, the chances of an escalation happening are pretty stinking high. Predictably, Moscow responded aggressively. Since June 8th, it's responded to some of the largest drone and missile attacks of the war, unleashing waves of 300 to 500 drones and missiles targeting Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv, Odessa, Kherson, and Kharkiv, which has resulted in casualties and damage to infrastructure. Some of the weapons Russia used in this were North Korean ballistic missiles and Iranian Shahed drones, which help illustrate how this war isn't just between two nations. And this matters to us for a few different reasons. First, the conflict going beyond borders. It's no longer contained within Ukraine. Both sides are targeting territory far from the front lines, which drastically increases the conflict scale and unpredictability. Second, it continues to carry risks to energy and food supplies for multiple nations. Disruptions in Ukraine's agricultural exports remain a top concern. The Black Sea shipping lanes are under strain, which threatens global grain supplies. Meanwhile, energy infrastructure, things like refineries, pipelines, and power grids have become direct targets, pushing fuel prices higher. And after that, cyber warfare could very well intensify. With physical conflict expanding, cyber threats are likely to accompany them. And preppers should see this as a heads up to reinforce digital and offline systems. Then, of course, there's the risk of nuclear escalation. Ukraine striking Russia's strategic bombers thins out Russia's nuclear triad, which in turn has prompted nuclear rhetoric from Moscow. And while actual use remains kind of unlikely, the remote possibility means having a basic radiological plan isn't overkill. Then there's other things going on near the front lines. Within the past week, we've seen Ukrainian drones strike a missile battery in western Russia, a Russian Su-35 fighter jet being shot down over Kursk, heavy frontline bombardment in Kherson and Kharkiv resulting in civilian casualties, and Ukrainian forces reportedly hitting fighter jets at Savasleika Air Base. Meanwhile, Russia's retaliated with large drone salvos across Ukraine and mass attacks on Ukrainian civilians, turning entire cities into war zones. Then there's activity within the NATO alliance. Germany's pledged increased military support, including helping Ukraine develop their own advanced missiles. NATO leaders are debating how to respond to Russian actions like recon flights over the Baltic Sea. And meanwhile, Ukraine's calling on the US and European powers to take more decisive action, in part to the use of missiles from outside of Russia. including the ones supplied from North Korea. But with peace talks stalled and no de-escalation plan in sight, the war is showing no signs of slowing. And with all this going on, it makes sense for folks like us to keep an eye on things and take a few basic steps. First, monitor energy and food markets, especially if you live in Europe. Next, increase your digital resilience by having offline backups of important information, encrypting important data, and having a backup power source. Then, even though this isn't something we like to talk about a whole lot, consider having some radiation contingencies. A good example of that would be the evac pack that I showed a couple of weeks ago. It has a gas mask, some filters, along with a bottle of potassium iodine tablets. Also, be sure to stay informed using credible sources. I like to do a mix of different news outlets from different countries and also check out some different forums. But remember, just because you heard it online, that doesn't make it true. Try to confirm everything that you see. Now, if you want to see a list of foods that you could eat in a disaster that don't need to be cooked, then click here. Or if you want to see the 10 most important items for preppers to stockpile, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.